I'm 18 years old and just got kicked out of my own house. I really need someone's advice right now. Growing up, my family was never perfect. My parents struggled with infertility for 4 years before finally conceiving me. It was considered a miracle because they had almost given up hope after trying for so long. When my mom found out she was pregnant, both of them were overjoyed and began planning for the future. Unfortunately, this happiness didn't last long. According to my grandma, my parents were never truly happy together. They have always had a lot of nasty fights, and even after my mom got pregnant with me, these fights never really stopped. All of their fights were pretty much about the same things every day. Mom hated the fact that Dad gambled, and Dad hated the fact that Mom was drinking the whole day even though she was pregnant with me. To compromise, Dad decided to stop gambling on the condition that Mom stops drinking as well, which Mom initially agreed with, but she never kept her end of the deal. Dad found out that she was secretly hiding alcohol bottles around the house to take a sip here and there. At this point, he felt that she was not only endangering herself by drinking alcohol, but also me. Hence, Dad gave her an ultimatum. He threatened that he would leave her if she did not stop, which apparently did not sit well with my mom. My grandma says that because of this, Mom got really pissed and started to abuse my dad verbally. She then threw a pair of scissors at my dad, which hit the corner of his eyes and injured him seriously. Later, when he was rushed to the doctor, he was informed that he had a partial corneal laceration which could be treated, but that he was extremely lucky that it did not result in permanent vision loss. This really scared my mom, and she begged my dad to not press any charges against her, and she promised to change. So my dad decided to let it go. When I was finally born, I had been told that both my parents were very happy and tried their best to take care of me. However, the peace between them didn't last long. According to my grandma, my dad one day came home from work to find me crying my eyes out in my nursery while Mom was passed out on the sofa, clearly drunk. He was furious and woke her up to confront her about it, but she kept saying that motherhood is hard and that it was just one drink. He would have also called CPS on her had she not calmed him down. I wish he had, because after getting drunk, Mom started to cleverly drink only during the morning after Dad would leave so that she would not get caught later in the evening. This is why I must have spent a lot of days in hunger, because my health started to deteriorate and I was losing weight really fast. Whenever my grandma would come to visit, she would always find the house in a complete mess. Dirty dishes in the sink, the floor sticky and filthy, and the entire place in disarray. She would find me wearing dirty diapers, dirty clothes with my hair uncombed. And whenever she tried to talk to my mom about the state of the house or about me, my mom would become extremely defensive and ask her to mind her own business. One time when my grandma came to visit us, she realized that my mom was clearly drunk during the day since she was unable to comprehend her words and kept giggling. When Grandma confronted her about it, my mom started to get angry and insisted that it wasn't a big deal. That's when my grandma decided enough was enough. She stayed with me the entire day so she could take care of me, and later, when my dad was back from work, she demanded that she take care of me for a few months so that she could admit my mom to a rehabilitation center. My mom tried to fight back, but my dad immediately agreed with my grandma since he too must have realized that his wife needed help. While my mother was admitted, I went to live with my grandma for a few months, and those months I spent with her were the best time in my entire life. She bathed me, read stories to me every night, cooked me healthy meals, and took me out to the park to play. I didn't even know these were things that parents were supposed to do with their children. She didn't shout at me like my mother would. If I wanted to play with her, she didn't slap me if I ever broke my plate by mistake. Living with my grandma made me feel safe. My grandma slowly became more of a mother to me and has since taken care of me more than anyone ever has. I'm so grateful that she is my grandma because I don't know how else I could have survived all those years. My dad would visit me all the time since he missed me a lot. He would tell me how much my mom missed me and that she could not wait to get well, so that she could hold me again. Honestly, I kind of dreaded going back to my parents' place. I wished that I could just stay with my grandma forever. However, in a few months, when my mother finally got sober and got her AA sobriety chip, the first thing she did was drive to my grandma's place and visit me. It was surreal seeing my mother after all these months, and I felt like meeting a stranger. My mother did look much better, and after she and Grandma had a talk, I was informed that I would be moving back to my parents' place later this weekend. No matter how much I cried or protested, my mom told me that she was my parent and I had no choice but to live with her. It felt painful to come back to my parents' place, which had so many bad memories. I guess the move must have mentally and emotionally affected me a lot because I started to eat a lot less, and I would puke a lot. At the mere age of 5, I was diagnosed with ED, and my parents did everything they possibly could to help me. They even took me for family therapy so that we could all heal from our past and move on. Slowly but surely, I started to feel better as I settled down, and my parents were no longer fighting. My mother was no longer drinking. She tried to be a more present parent, which made me start to trust her. Dad even cut down on his working hours so that he could spend more time with us. However, things took a turn for the worse one afternoon when my dad and I came home from school and caught my mother cheating on him. She had the audacity to bring her affair partner into our house, and we walked in on them doing the dirty deed. I was absolutely traumatized, and my dad was speechless for a few minutes. His whole face was red in embarrassment as my mom and her affair partner rushed to cover themselves up. He told me to go upstairs while he confronted my mother, and her affair partner ran out of the house in terror. I could hear my parents yelling at each other loudly, and my mother, being the narcissist that she is, blamed him for why she had been cheating. She said that she felt too pressured to be perfect, and this other guy made her feel like a normal person. She told my dad how she felt like no matter what she did, he was always disappointed with her because of her past mistakes. My dad yelled back that she was a coward and that he was done with her. He demanded that she move out immediately, and this is when my mom started to beg him that he should not be this cruel, and that he cannot do that to the mother of his son. She told him that the other guy meant nothing, and that they needed to fix the marriage for the sake of me. That night, my grandma came to pick me up as my parents continued to yell at each other. She didn't say a word or two to say to my mother, but mostly stayed out of it. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed with my grandma while my mom and dad sorted things out at home. My mother would call me every day and pretend as if she was very concerned about me, when I knew by now that she didn't care about anything else except for herself. I'm not sure if my dad stayed with my mom because he truly loved her or simply because he was accustomed to their troubled relationship. Eventually, he chose to stay under the condition they attend marriage counseling. Despite his choice, I couldn't look at my mom the same way after catching her with another man. It felt like I had lost all respect for her. As if things couldn't get any worse for us as a family, just 3 months after this incident, my dad was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He had severe stomach cramps one day, which made him collapse at work, and later, when he was taken to the hospital, it was discovered that his health was quickly deteriorating, and he needed to start treatment immediately. This started long days of chemotherapy bed rest, since my dad had to take time away from work to try to fight against the cancer. He had some money saved up, and even my grandmother was willing to help. My mom, on the other hand, was not happy with this. She would constantly complain about how draining and expensive these treatments and doctor visits were. Dad encouraged her to find a part-time job at least and would promise her about how he would go right back to his job and support her like he has always done once he recovers. Eventually, Mom didn't have a lot of choice, so she started working as a server at a local restaurant. Her shifts were long, and she would pretty much stay out until late at night, while my grandma would drive my dad to and back from the hospital for his treatment. Our neighbor, who had a daughter the same age as me, offered to take me to school every day, which was a huge help for us. This is how I became friends with Shirley. She and I have been friends for a long time now, since we pretty much grew up together. Shirley's parents knew about my family history, as did a lot of neighbors, since my parents were not particularly subtle with their yelling matches. So when Shirley and I became close, they started inviting me to have lunch dinner with them as well. My dad saw no issue with this, and neither did I. However, my mom would always berate me for spending so much time at their place. She would tell me how they only saw me as a charity case, and that I was nothing more than a broken toy to them. In hindsight, this might be true, but as they spent more and more time with me, I started to see how they treated me like one of their own. In fact, when Shirley's mom found out that I liked apple pie, she would make sure to always bake one for me during the weekends. Shirley's dad taught me to play basketball, and we spent many evenings practicing hoops outside their garage. They sort of became like a second family to me over time. Hence, it was no surprise to anyone when Shirley and I started to date. Eventually, Shirley brought everything positive to my life, and I am grateful every day that she is still my girlfriend, despite all my crazy family history. Unluckily, my mom has never really warmed up to Shirley or her family over all this time, but they have never let her dislike come in their way of treating me with affection and love. A year into fighting cancer, my dad was informed by his doctors that the chemo was not helping him anymore. They said he didn't have very long to live. This news was heartbreaking for all of us. I spent many nights crying for him. As a child, I just could not understand why I was going to be losing the only parent who genuinely loved me. I struggled to come to terms with my grief. My dad spent his last months with me, Mom, and Grandma as much as he could. One morning, he just didn't wake up anymore, no matter how much I called for him. I knew something was wrong. I ran to tell my mom, who called 911 immediately. I can't begin to write the pain I felt when the paramedics declared that he was dead. The only comfort we had was that he had passed away peacefully in his sleep. I did not let them take my dad's body away until I was literally physically restrained by my mom. I kept crying and screaming in grief. It was only when my grandma arrived that I calmed down a bit. I couldn't imagine the grief that she must have felt at that moment. The funeral happened without any issues. However, the real twist came when Dad's lawyer arrived to read his will. It was then revealed that Dad had left all his money and his house to me. My mom was shocked and even asked the lawyer to show her the papers. I guess Dad knew the kind of person she was. He wanted me to have his house and whatever little money was left after chemo so that I could have a decent start in life. Mom didn't like this one bit and kept asking the lawyer if she could fight this in court. Since the house rightfully should go to her as his wife, she believed. However, since my dad had changed his will long before he went into chemotherapy, it meant that he was sound of mind. Well, that she didn't have any strong ground to stand on. My mom asked me what I wanted to do with the house. I told her that I wanted to stay in the house. She told me how we could sell the house and move to a much better location. But I had just lost my dad, and this house was all I had that reminded me of him, so I obviously refused. It wasn't like she had any choice in this matter, so she continued to live in the house. I did notice that she looked extremely disappointed, but I didn't think much about it at that time. However, not even 2 months later, my mom informed me that she had met someone. She wanted me to meet him finally. Imagine my surprise when I walked into the restaurant. She introduced me to none other than Andrew, the very same guy she had been caught sleeping with years ago by Dad and me. I immediately recoiled in disgust and shock. As the man extended his hand to greet me, I asked my mom if this was the same guy. She acted all surprised and told me to sit down so she could explain further. I didn't shake the guy's hand or acknowledge him at all. I was really angry at my mom for assuming I'd want to meet him. She started telling me how they had gotten back in touch after all this time. She said Andrew was just an old friend who made her feel good after Dad's death. There was something in her words that made me feel like she was lying to me. They also seemed extremely cozy with each other and kept kissing, which made me even more uncomfortable. I started to think about all those nights she came back home late at night while my dad was still alive. She gave excuses that she was working overtime when she could have been meeting up with this guy behind our backs. Throughout the evening, I kept ignoring Andrew whenever he tried to make any small talk with me. Later, my mom was pissed at me for being rude to her boyfriend. She told me how disrespectful it was. I remember she even told me that this is why she was thinking of marrying Andrew. In the next few months, she hoped I could have a positive role model in my life. I was furious hearing this. I told her there was no way I wanted him in my life. If they did get married, she had to move out because I would rather live alone than with a man who had the audacity to have an affair with her while my dad was still alive. My mom threatened me that I was still underage and that she was my parent, so I had no real choice in this matter anyways. Unfortunately, she was right. True to her word, she soon got married to Andrew, and he quickly moved into our house. Once he moved in, he made sure to remind me every day that he was the man of the house. He hated the fact that I had pictures of my dad and me in our living room. One day, after I came back from school, I discovered that he had taken those pictures down and put them in the basement. When I angrily confronted him, he told me that he and my mom needed to make a fresh start. Hence, I was only allowed to put up pictures of my dad inside my bedroom. As if this wasn't enough for me to hate him, he was also extremely controlling. He would call my mom every time her shift ended and would call her back again if she was even a minute late. Slowly, he started to do this with me as well, but I shut him down quickly. I reminded him that he was not my father in any way and that I was going to stay out as long as I wanted. I had the keys to the house anyway, so it wasn't like he could lock me out. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't staying out to party or anything. I would simply spend my evenings at Shirley's place or at the library. There, I could peacefully finish my homework and study. Throughout this time, I continued to have a good relationship with my grandma. I visited her as much as I could. We would simply sit and watch an old black and white movie or reminisce about the old days. When I graduated from high school, my mom didn't even bother to attend my high school graduation. Although I didn't expect much from her by this time, I was still a bit sad that my only parent didn't care about me a single bit. However, my grandmother and Shirley's parents were there for me, and they cheered for me during graduation. Later, when I was getting ready to go out to party with my friends, my mom came into my room to inform me that she and Andrew felt that I was now an adult, so I needed to step up and take responsibility around the house. Confused, asked her what she meant by that, since I always washed my own dishes and did my laundry. This was when my mother informed me that I needed to find a job and start paying the bills around the house. She said that Andrew felt I wasn't carrying my weight and that as an adult he expected me to contribute money. I was a bit pissed that she didn't give me a single day to celebrate before dumping this news on me, but nevertheless I agreed to contribute as much as I could. Over the next few weeks, I applied and got a job as a cashier at Burger King while also simultaneously applying to various colleges. Eventually, I got into a good college in my town, which meant that I didn't have to waste money by opting for hostel accommodations, but I did need to buy a car so it would be easier for me to attend classes. I decided to have a talk with my mom to ask her if she could help me buy a car. But she and Andrew immediately got pissed hearing this. Andrew yelled at me that they were doing more than enough for me with the tight income they both had, and that for once I needed to stop being so selfish. I couldn't comprehend exactly what it was that made me selfish in his book, but Mom didn't even try to defend me. She told me that I was on my own and that as an adult I needed to figure things out. Imagine my surprise when just a few weeks later, I woke up to a few workers remodeling the kitchen and the downstairs washroom. When I asked Mom about it, she told me that Andrew was sick of how old and rusty the house looked, so he was going to be changing a few things here and there. I asked her where they got the money to do this when, according to them, they didn't even have the money to help me out with the car a few weeks ago. Hearing this, Mom got frustrated with me and said that I was being entitled to expect them to help me. For the next few weeks, I watched Mom and Andrew change things around the house and completely revamp it. I kept my mouth shut throughout all of this and just kept my head down. Shirley knew I was upset over this and tried to cheer me up as much as she could. However, today when I returned home, I found my things and my clothes in the living room. I rushed to check on my things, yelling at Mom about why they were there and not in my room. This is when Andrew and Mom came downstairs to tell me that they needed to talk to me about something very important. They then went on to excitedly announce that Mom was pregnant with Andrew's child and that they had kept this news to themselves for over 2 months. Andrew then went on to state that as the father of the child, he needed to think about the needs of his child first. Hence, he had decided to change my room into a nursery for his baby. My mouth hung open in shock as he went on to say that it was time for me to move out and live on my own since him and Mom had agreed that they could not take care of a freeloader anymore. Mom nodded in agreement and suggested I could move into Grandma's place until I could afford my own. I could feel teardrops welling up in my eyes. At that moment, I felt so unwanted that I didn't even bother to argue with them. I called an Uber and I took all my important documents so I could spend the night here at my grandma's place. She's as shocked as me, and she hates my mom even more now. She wanted to go right back and confront my mom, but before that, I wanted to take some legal advice. I have just recently turned 18, and I know that the house rightfully belongs to me. So will I face any issues removing my mother and Andrew from the premises? Will I have to consult with a lawyer regarding this? Update. Okay, guys, thanks for all your advice. I read all of your comments and decided to do what most of you told me to do. First of all, today I went to visit my lawyer to understand my legal stance better. The lawyer informed me that there was no way that Mom and Andrew had any right over the house, as my dad's will was crystal clear. I needed to hand them a formal eviction notice, which could then be used to sue them if they didn't abide by it. After this, I visited my house with my grandma. Had the keys to my place, so I didn't even bother to ring the doorbell. Luckily, there was no one home. I called Shirley's dad and asked him if he could help me change the locks on the main door and the back door, and fortunately, he agreed. By the time Shirley and Andrew returned home, the locks had been changed. I met them outside on the porch with my grandma and refused to let them inside. Andrew was furious seeing me standing there, but my 5'5" grandma was not scared of him one bit. She looked him right in the eyes and told him that they had 30 days to move out, since I had decided to sell the house and there was nothing that they could do to stop it. I then handed them a written notice signed by my lawyer outlining their 30-day eviction period and the legal consequences they would face if they did not comply. Andrew snatched the paper from my hand to inspect it, his face turning red in anger. He then crumpled it, but Grandma warned him that destroying it wouldn't change anything. They had 30 days, and that was non-negotiable. Seeing this unfold, Mom started to beg me and tell me that I should not put her through so much stress during her pregnancy. She went on to say how big of an inconvenience it would be for them to move out when she was already going through so much. I was so mad at her for never defending me all this time that I started yelling at her for being such a horrible mother to me for all these years. I reminded her how she would just leave me to fend for myself while she would be passed out from drinking. I told her how as an adult she needed to find her own place and stop living at my place. Hearing this, she started to plead even more, but I told her that she and her freeloader husband were done mooching off of me and my house. Andrew looked horrified and tried to ignore me and get inside the house, but quickly realized that his keys didn't work anymore since the locks had been changed. He started to yell at me, but I told him that I would call the police on him because he was technically trespassing on my property now. It was satisfying to see him look pissed but unable to do anything. Told both of them that this was only going to be the start of all their trouble and their new baby if they didn't listen to me. I reminded them that not only would I sue them, but I would make sure that it would drain all their finances, while I could just recover the money from selling the house eventually. I told them that I had nothing to lose at this point, and that me and Grandma were going to be staying with them for the next 30 days to make sure that they were going to be packing and leaving. Andrew and Mom were clearly not expecting this and tried to argue back, but I wasn't having it. I reminded them that I was the owner and they were merely just guests, so if they didn't like what I was saying, they were free to go to a motel, and that I would move all their things out to the porch for them to collect the next morning. Their faces turned a mix of anger and desperation, but they knew that I was done with this was my house, my rules, and it was time for them to respect that. Update 2. Wow, I woke up today to find my post on TikTok. I live in a small town, so there is a high chance that if my neighbors or friends come across my post or the video circulating, then they might recognize me. Now addressing the questions about why I'm giving my mom and Andrew a 30-day legal notice is because my lawyer advised that this would ensure they have no grounds to sue me if this ever goes to court. As for those asking about the money my stepdad spent on remodeling the house, I want to be fair. When I sell the house, I am prepared to reimburse him for the remodeling costs, provided he can produce proper bills that my lawyer can verify. As for those asking why my grandma and I are staying here with my mom and Andrew, is because I don't want them to unfairly claim any part of this property since they don't pay me any rent. As the owner of the house, I'm not going to leave my property. I have also refused to provide them with a key to my doors, so they can't even claim that they live here with a key. My grandma, who is a no-nonsense person, wants to be here to make sure these leeches are out of here soon. Update 3. It's been a while since I gave an update here. Well, some of you suspected my stepdad and mom did try to play dirty and refused to move out when their 30 days legal notice ended. However, I'm smarter than them. The next time they went for my mom's ultrasound, I moved all their things to the porch and refused to let them back in. They came back and tried to call the police on me, but there was nothing the police could do. I calmly presented evidence that I owned the house legally. I explained that neither my stepdad nor my mom had a key to the house. Seeing this, the police informed them that their only option was to go to court if they wanted to contest my claim. Andrew cursed me out loudly and started to walk over aggressively, but one of the officers warned him to calm down or risk being detained. Eventually, my mom and Andrew were removed from my property, and it was satisfying to watch them realize exactly what they had lost. Since then, I have installed cameras all over my property and talked with a real estate agent who will start showing the house to potential buyers next week.